It's the final word story time. 190. 190 being the cap number for Richie Benaud when he played Test cricket for Australia all those years ago. I'm Adam Collins. I'm in London. I'm back in London. I'm in London still, as it's the Waifs, wasn't it? Sung.
It was the Waifs.
Waifs,
yes,
many years ago.
I miss you like my left arm that's been lost in a war. That was the standout line.
And it's this really lovely, the whole song. I mean, I love that song. How can you not love that song? But I love how it ends on like a quite overt drug reference in the final chorus or final verse, rather. I'm dreaming of your sunset, and I'm dreaming of your herb. Like it's just a really crude thrown at the end there. Anyway,
maybe it's just a guy named Herb.
Yeah,
maybe he was the landlord or something of like a nice apartment where they happened. It was like a cool guy who owned the block and like gave him cheap rent. I don't know.
One of the names I wanted to use had we had a boy, actually, Herb, was something I threw up there because my grandmother's brother, who she was closest to, was Uncle Herbie, and I thought that would be a nice name. But Rach was quick to Herbie Collins would have been interesting, having named it after Australian Test cricketer.
Herbie Hancock would have been a great jazz musician. Herbie the Love Bug, although in a sort of STI context, a love bug is probably not a good thing.
No, probably not. So I'm here. I flew back a couple of nights ago. I kind of forgotten how quick the flight is. Like only 6 hours back from New York to London. So I was it was kind of an up and down couple of hours. Kip, I'm still pretty knackered because you don't sleep much on those flights. You're still at New York.
All those people on the Titanic pulled the wrong run. Should have just waited 30 years. And it would have been fun.
You're in New York. Your final day there. The final game has been run and won. This will be coming out in a couple of days' time. But you're off to your next adventure. Where's your next stop, Jeff? St. Lucia, is that right?
Antigua for a few days. I'm gonna, in theory, if the trains run on time, I will go straight from landing to commentating a game at the ground that afternoon. Right. So we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, well, the good thing about Antigua is that, well, I think from memory, once you're out of the St. John's bit, there's only one set of lights, more or less. It's sort of the central northern bit of the island there, and that sort of indicates just how small the place is. So once you've landed, there's no such thing as a traffic jam in the direction you're traveling, which you land right next to the what's now known as the Coolidge Stadium, but it was what's his name again? Alan Stanford. The ground he named after himself. And then you're only sort of 10 or 15 minutes away from getting to the Viv Richards Stadium. One of the grounds I hate the most in the world, actually. There aren't many grounds I'd attest that one. But I'm sure you'll have a nice time. And on we go with the World Cup. One thing before we get into this, Jeff, I would normally do this in the middle of the show, but I want to highlight the fact that Westfield. Now, there's the Westfield question, which is quite a good one this week, if I do say so myself. That comes from the weekly show. Puts you in the running to win the £50 voucher every week of the World Cup, drawn out of a hat, so to speak, and that's straightforward. So download the Westfield app in the UK, win yourself 50 quid, on and on it goes. But all of the winners of that, plus everyone else in our Final Word community, well, the winners of that have the chance to win the grand prize, which is a big day on the Tonk at Sixers. But everyone else can join the watch party for the World Cup final. And this is going to be fun. I don't think anyone knows or anyone realises, least of all me until yesterday, it's actually an afternoon game in the UK, which is terrific. So 3 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, you can rock up at Sixers Westfield London, so the Shepherd's Bush one, and watch the World Cup final with the Final Word community. So it's not an RSVP thing per se, but I would like to have an idea of numbers. So if you can, reply to me somewhere that you're keen on being part of it. And if you've never met us before, what better time than during a World Cup final? There'll be lots of friendly faces about, and that group's always growing. So make that your destination for the World Cup final, Westfield, London. And along with Westfield, Stratford City, they're more extra and they're less ordinary.
Yep, I will not be there, but there might be. Maybe can we organise a life-size cardboard cutout? Maybe in time. That's one of your specialist areas, is to add to your collection, to add to the Dunstall and the James Hird and whoever else.
Mark Waugh, I've got 3 of them somewhere. Yeah. The Mark Waugh bought for a round of beers. The James Hird bought when I was very pissed one night on eBay during the middle of the drug scandal, and the Jason Dunstall, which was a gift for my 21st birthday back from the 1993 season when I watched Jason kick over 100 goals in that season. Yep. Jeff, we've got, I wouldn't say limited time today, but we want to get this done. We don't want to fuck around today. We want to get straight to the point.
Limited enough
that I'm going to ask you what we're about to play.
Yes. As Earthboy said in the song "Long Loud Hours," we don't have time to fuck around.
Yes.
What we're going to play No pledge, no pledge. The game we play with nice people on the internet who fund this program, and they do that. They do that by sending in contributions in a very specific combination of numbers. A unit of currency that's not your normal unit. It means something in cricketese. That's what we have to figure out. Dane Hanstead, for instance, has sent through $3.47. That means something. There's no clue as far as I can tell, unless I missed it. But usually with Dane, it involves something to do with Victorian cricket, and thus you can get enough of a lead to see where you might be going. 347 feels cap number-ish. That's 3 caps before Shane Warne. Who's 3 caps before Shane Warne?
I can probably find that out because I've got that tab open from when I did the Richie Benno bit at the start of the show. And now I can just pad for 3 or 4 seconds, and I can tell you that it was Greg Campbell, who we actually have done a nerd pledge on before.
Which recently we talked about him 2 weeks ago, I think.
4 test matches.
Because he was running Papua New Guinea cricket.
Yes, that's right. That's right. No, it is a cap number, sort of, but interesting way I'm going to get there. You're right. There is always a strong theme of Victorian cricket with Dane. I looked at what other things it could be. It's possible it's when Will Pekowski made his double 100 against WA back in the summer of 2020-21. It was the second of 2 double hundreds he made in a row. That was made in 347 balls. So, it could be that. But I don't feel like Dane's giving us something with a player who's around at the moment. Dane really gets into the spirit of things with Nerd Pledge. And therefore, I'm going to ask DC to play the music. All right. Now, Dusty Old Bastard, when it was conceived of, Jeff, way back when, during the pandemic, was to do with test players who came and went, often between the wars in that mental era, quite a lot of the time England players featuring. And I usually would use the cap number to get there. Well, this time around, I'm going to do the same for someone that meets almost all the criteria but didn't play a test match. Cap number 347 for Victoria. Now, once I reached this player, the 347th player for Victoria, I had to learn more because the story is a belter. I want to tell you all about John Leslie Ellis, known as Jack Ellis, of course. For that era, anyone who was John was a Jack. He was born in 1890, the May of 1890, in Melbourne. Had to wait until 1918 when he was 28 to play first-class cricket and take the gloves for the Vics. World War I playing a role in that. But just from my early searches here, looking through his cricket archive page, he wasn't even playing district cricket till 1917. He ended up playing for Param, where he would stay. But yes, it feels to me he actually played subbies for Malvern, who were a club that I played a lot against when I was in that competition. Some of my favourite memories are playing on that beautiful ground there on City Oval, it's called, with the tiny little grandstand and all the rest of it. So very much a Malvern boy, eventually going to Param. I'm quite keen to learn what he did in his 20s. He probably served in World War I, but I can't substantiate that without going into the war records, and I don't have access to that. Anyway, he was drafted in. This is what I found in a newspaper article from 1917. He was drafted in early 17. It was 17-18. My apologies. To play for Northcote as a sub on a tour of Ballarat. So he did well there. And I'm tipping what's happened is he's done well for Northcote, and then Paran have recruited him. And not long after that, by the end of the 18-19 season, so I think that's the first season back of state cricket, and the Shield starts the year after that. So it's not called the Shield in 18-19 because of obvious reasons. The war only ended at the very end of 1918. So they play a few first-class games, but it's not recognised as the Shield.
Not a full season.
Yeah, that's it.
It's just getting back on the horse.
That's right. So he does make his debut against New South Wales, and he's their main wicketkeeper, Victoria, from that point. Sod all runs, clearly a specialist keeper, and that reputation was enhanced when playing for Paran. He took 6 catches in an innings against St Kilda in 1920, which stands out. You press fast forward a few seasons. His best returns with the bat in the first part of his career was in 1924-25 when Victoria went for a full tour of New Zealand at the end of the season. Like, how brilliant is that, right? They go and play every province, every first-class province in New Zealand at the end of their own season, which I think is a nice thing, which of course would never happen now. He made 314 runs, including the first of his 2 first-class centuries and a couple of 50s over in New Zealand as well. He posted 3 figures at Dunedin against Otago, where you were a few weeks ago, Jeff. He opened the batting in that game and made 103 in 243 minutes. His previous highest score was 94. Pretty good side, by the way. Bill Woodfull's in there, bunch of final word favourites, Hans Ebling, Vern Ransford, Edgar Mayne, who was the captain. So I think we've done answers on all three of those men. Bill Woodfull comes up all the time, of course. But after making the 100 in the first innings...
Well, Edgar out here in 1913
that's right.
In the United States leading that tour.
Absolutely, yes. That's one of those really long answers we did a couple of years ago, which we stumble back around time and time again. So he makes 100 in the first dig, his first-class century, and he's relegated back to number 8 in the second innings. That's normally where he lives, right? He's a number 8, or indeed, occasionally, a number 9. But his gloves are so good that in 1926, he gets picked to go to England as Bert Oldfield's understudy. Oldfield's the number 1, of course, and we told the story of Bert Oldfield in World War One about this time last year as well. Extremely lucky to survive. Well, he's in the Australian team by this point, and yes, we've got our man from Victoria, Jack Ellis, as the number 2 keeper. Interesting that in the write-up of his career, it says that he only played a handful of games in England. He actually played 13 times on that tour, and he took 21 catches and completed 23 stumpings. So that's quite rare, I reckon, in a whole tour, more stumpings than catches, and that's largely due to the fact that Arthur Maley was spinning for Australia at the time and was beating the outside edge fairly routinely with his leg breaks. He played against Essex, Hampshire, Cambridge Uni, Oxford Uni, Yorkshire, Durham, Northants, Worcestershire, Lancashire, West of Scotland, East of Scotland, Glamorgan, Warwickshire, Gloucestershire, Somerset, and Kent. And in non-first class fixtures, right, he played against the public schools at Lord's. Somehow the public schools combined team were getting a game at Lord's back in 1926. And the Australian touring team in 26 played a game against the British Civil Service, which is quite cute. So all up, they played 42 fixtures. A shitload of them were non-first class status, and he was part of that. Ellis. And perfectly acceptable returns with the bat, I should note. He made 322 runs at 32. It's his best actual season with the bat was the one he played in England in 26. Somehow didn't make a 50 despite making all those runs, but he was very dependable, down the list kind of guy, and clearly doing a bang-up job with the gloves, which is why he was there. I wonder, Jeff, is there a book in reserve wicketkeepers? I mean, we're talking about Ellis here and his life, but there are so many others who have
Graham Manu on the front cover, definitely.
Yeah, Graham Manu, who got a test match. Darren Berry, who didn't. Jimmy Pearson last year, who didn't. Tim Zura, who obviously wrote his own book.
Tim Zura, we've talked about so much.
But, you put them all together. There are many others, but that's just a handful of interesting stories of guys who went as the backup keeper. I mean, you could even do guys who went on to become the full-time keeper. Adam Gilchrist did it a little bit for Ian Healy. Barry Jarman, as backup keeper, ended up the Australian Test captain for a solitary match. So, I wonder whether there is something there. Anyway, to the next Australian summer, 26-27. This is my favourite part of his story, Jeff, coming up here. This was the season where Victoria made the record score of 1,107. A game that we've spoken about before. But our man Jack Ellis had quite a big hand in it. Here's how. So, Bill Ponsford, 352. Jack Ryder, 295. Bill Woodfull, the aforementioned 133, the captain. And Stork Hendry, 100 even. But coming in at number 9, our bloke Jack, it's 7 for 915, right? So they're pretty keen to go beyond 1,000. And Jack Ellis is the man who scores the 1,000th run. And also the run that takes them past the previous record of 1,055, which Victoria posted a few seasons before that. And upon passing 1,000 and 1,059, Jack roared out, "Long live Victoria," as they went beyond the milestones, which I thought was pretty cool.
That was the version, in that era, that was the version of Queenslander.
Yes. The crowd roars, the crowd cheers. Are we happy? You fucking beauty. Whoa! Bay 13, not quite then. He made 63, so a rare half century for him in that match.
Okay.
His obituary called him one of the more animated characters around cricket at the time. Given this is the interwar period, that's quite a competitive field of loose units who are floating about. So I guess that long live Victoria thing kind of stacks up. He had a really awful batting season in 27-28. He only made 66 runs at 8.25. But he's still there in 28-29. I'm reading here that he must have had so much goodwill as the keeper. Victoria enjoying such a successful period that they didn't want to change a winning formula. But the faith they showed in him to stay there in 28-29 paid off. in a game at Adelaide Oval in the December of 1928 against Victor Richardson South Australians, where he gets 119 in the second innings. He plays one more full season in 1929-30, then one game in 30-31, and that's it for Victoria. All up, he played 72 games for the Vicks in first-class cricket, 48 in the Shield, to the point where he made his debut. Only Jack Ryder, who played 80 games, Vernon Ransford, 76, who made their debuts before him, played more games for the Vicks, and only one fewer than Lindsay Hassett, who, of course, made his debut after him. So it gives some sense of what a fixture he was in the Victorian side, a side that won the Shield in 21-22, 23-24, 24-25, 27-28, 29-30, and 19-30-31. So, albeit only 3 or 4 teams in those seasons, so it was easier to win. But still, he was an important part of all of that. And, Jeff, the nice little postscript here, which you're going to enjoy. At age 44, they decided to take a side to India and Ceylon, as it was known at the time. But there was such a blow-up in 1935-36, this is, I should say. There was such a blow-up about them going to South Africa, the test team at the same time, not wanting to reduce the Shield or compromise the rest of the Shield comp with taking another Australian team away, that they took a team of veterans. Say Jack Ryder, at age 46, captains the Australian 11. Our man Jack's playing and keeping at 44. He plays 9 matches in India, 1 in Ceylon, 18 stumpings and 11 catches. So again, fast hands were a real theme for him. But the other old boys in there, Stork Henry's 40, Dainty Ironmonger's 53, Frank Tarrant's 54, Hammy Love's 40, Charlie McCartney, 49, Ron Roxenham, 44. And also on that trip was a younger bloke, Harry Alexander, who I did the story of a little while ago, who was the wild man who was brought in to mix it up with Jardine in the final test of Bodyline in 32-33. He was still floating about and got a trip here as well. So they all had first-class status. And yes, Jack Ellis played 3 of the 4 unofficial test matches. So he ends up with 101 games all up. These all, of course, got retained as first class despite being a bunch of old boys. Made over 2,500 runs at 21 with a couple of tons, 187 catches, 107 stumpings. Died in 1974 at age 84 in Glen Iris, which is around the corner from where he was born. Jack Ellis, long live Victoria, another proud big V man for Dane Hansted.
Very good. I just, hope he was involved in IXL in some way. I don't know. I'm just getting big Jack energy. I suppose everybody who ended up being called Jack had something of that. There were, Flat Jack. There were lots of Jack. What if you're actually called Jack? I mean, these days parents go for Jack's a very common baby name, but people go for it flat out. So then do you get called John? I don't know. Right. I think I've got time to do one before the break. I have got one from Jane Sieber. The number was originally $4.99. Comes with a clue.
It does. So Jane says, my pledge relates to the usual theme, but also the early hero of the test, Betty Snowball. It's possible she'll be a theme with lots of us about this week before there was some mild plotting to set it up for a Norcross Snowball story time. Now, we haven't quite nailed that, unfortunately. It's you and me this week. So hopefully Jane will enjoy what you're about to talk about. There was another clue in here for you as well, Jeff, that if Jane were making this pledge now, as opposed to when she did, it would be $5.99 instead of $4.99, and I think that's what unlocked it for you.
Yes, so this must have come through after the Trent Bridge Women's Ashes test last year. It would now be $5.99. And yeah, I didn't quite manage to nail Daniel Norcross, who was floating around. We were going to do some Betty Snowball chat, but we didn't quite have time. Sorry, Jane, but he'll talk about it anytime. I'm sure we can make that happen in future. $4.99 and then $5.99. What about 4 times 99 and 5 times 99? Because in the Trent Bridge test last year, of course, Elise Perry was out for 99 and then said that she wasn't bothered and it was fine and she didn't mind at all. And she actually even seemed relatively convincing about it. Maybe she just doesn't care about these things in the same way that we nuffies do. Anyway, it was dramatic. She gets caught in the gully by Nat Sibber-Brunt off Lauren Filer, who was bowling absolute gas at that point on debut, bowling quick. There's some interesting thing with Perry where people think of her as a ton machine. She's a run machine, but not a ton machine. You might remember in 50 over cricket, it took years for her to make her first 100. She had something like 28 half centuries, a lot of them up towards 90, but big 50s, but before she actually made her first one-day 100. She's still only got a couple from memory, maybe 3 or 4 in the 50-over format. And in Test cricket, she had the 213 at Sydney. She made 116 in her first innings at Taunton in 2019, and then didn't bother getting the twin tons that I've talked about on the show before. And I'm still mad about that she was like, 76 not out in the second innings. And they shook hands an hour early and she was batting slowly as well, instead of trying to actually notch twin tons, which would have been a first for women's tests. 68 not out the next time she bats in a test match. There's the Gold Coast game against India where she was 1 not out. And then 18 and 41 in Canberra, that dramatic test match, which was a low-scoring sort of game. So, not stacks and stacks of hundreds, but average of 62 in test cricket. And what happened in that test with the 99, and then you look at what happened in the most recent test, which was the South Africa one at Perth, where Elisa Healy gets out for 99. So that makes our 4 times, that then becomes our 5. When Annabelle Sutherland does the Elise Perry sort of job, makes 210. The captain, after making 99, caught and bowled off the bowling of Delmy Tucker, who you might remember, who bowled some pretty innocuous looking off spin. I kind of liked her style. Like she seemed like one of those mid-range kind of cricketers, but she came in with a bit of an attitude. She batted with some attitude. She flighted the ball a fair bit, but gave it a bit of a rip. But she was getting knocked around. She'd bowled 12 overs at a runner ball and then gets that leading edge off Healy, gets forward to take the catch, and it remains Healy's highest score in tests, and it may well do so because they don't get that much opportunity to play test cricket in the women's team, which would leave her in that group of players with the highest test score of 99. Alex Tudor, we've talked about a lot. Jess Jonathan, we were both there watching her on her debut at Canterbury in 2015. So she's one of the 5 in women's cricket. There are 10 in men's cricket, Shane Warne famously. Mitchell Starc, obviously everybody made the Starc-Healy comparison at the time, but we would have been, certainly on White Line Wireless, we were commentating his 99 in 2013 when he nicked one off Ishant Sharma, I reckon. I haven't looked that up, but off the top of my head, it's a booming drive that edges one behind. There's Deepak Patel, who we haven't talked about a lot, only in terms of the early overs bowling in the World Cup in 92. And there's Norman Yardley, who was the England captain in 1948. 2 other women who got 99 to take it to the other one is a final word favourite, and the other part of the clue that Jane referenced. So if we start there, it's 1937. We're in England. We're at the Oval. We're in that era that you were talking about in terms of Myrtle McLagan a week or 2 ago. This is about another star player. So this is the 7th women's test overall. It's the 3rd and final test of this series. 1-1 coming into it, and the previous series was 34-35. So England won that. They just need a draw here to retain the trophy. Not that the trophy necessarily exists at that time, but in theory, to be the retainers.
Yeah, that's right. The retrospective Women's Ashes, it does click that through that way on like Wikipedia, for example. But it wasn't not called that at the time, absolutely.
So Australia make 207 for 9. Joan Davis, Pfeiffer, Myrtle takes 1 for 46. England, 308 for 9. Good reply. Top score, Daniel's favourite player, Betty Snowball, with her 99. Nor is it your run-of-the-mill 99, if there is such a thing. She's the first to ever be run out for 99 in Test cricket. She's resumed on 96. Jess Jonathan resumed on 95. She struggles to keep going. She eventually takes on the arm of Nell McClarty, who I've been reading about a bit in Marianne Stell's book, which is one that I'd like to talk about on the show at some point. You can't take on Nell McClarty, not that arm, direct hit. There's a photo of it. Someone's got a pretty good real-time snap, like action snap, where she's running her bat in Snowball. The leg stump's knocked out of the ground. It's very close. The bat's right on the crease, but the ball's already ricocheting from the stumps, so it would have hit a split second earlier. So I'm pretty confident in giving her out on that one.
She's
wearing the visor.
Yeah, I was going to say, I had a look at the photo as well, wearing a visor, which you've now made that your thing, Jeff. This is Jeff Lemon visor summer coming up.
I'm into my visor era. I never considered it before, never thought about it, aside from, I don't know, like, pretending to be a poker dealer or whatever it is. But when you've got a lot of curly hair, you can't put normal hats on. It doesn't work. The hair's too big. You can't fit. And I've already got the heaviest head in the Western Australian squad. So even just normally I can't get a hat on, whereas with hair, impossible. But the visor allows the hair to go at the top and still gives you the benefit of a brim. I'm in. I'm a 60-year-old retiree in Florida playing golf, all of which are things that I would hate to do, but that's sort of the vibe. Sometimes you've just got to lean in. Anyway, Australia make 224 the second time around and set 124 to win. England are 3 down and 9. The time's up. Time's up. It's a draw. 3 days.
Oh.
It's always a 3-day game, you know? Why did they keep playing 3-day test matches why did they keep playing 4-day test matches?
It would have been
England
an absolute classic. I mean, you look at that scorecard, right? They're 9 for 3. 124 is the target. The Ashes are, the trophy or whatever you want to call it, the series at the very least.
Yeah, the series is live.
Is on the line. They're all of 2 hours away at most from being able to reach a satisfactory result there. I'm not saying, that Australia are going to win because they're taking 3 England wickets. It's only 124, thus 122 away when they would have returned.
It's a big score in that format at that time.
Yeah,
there weren't
it is.
A lot of, there aren't a lot of 14 games.
Yeah, that's true. But Myrtle hadn't batted yet, and nor had Betty. And they were the 2 superstars. They were the next 2 in. So I think they lost a wicket from the last ball of the match that made it 9 for 3. So Myrtle might have come in at 5, and Betty Snowball might have come in at 6. But still, the point stands that it's a bloody shame that particular series ended in that fashion because it was on the cusp of something special.
Yep. So she does get a Test 100 eventually. Thankfully, she makes that famous 189 that we should have referenced when it was episode 189 last week. We also didn't reference Viv Richards' 189, which is more famous, dare I say, than Zach Crawley's. Nonetheless, it was the England record up until that Trent Bridge test last year when Tammy Beaumont went past a bit of double hundred, and that was why Daniel Norcross was talking about Betty Snowball so much, because he was on commentary, just fizzing over with disbelief that Betty Snowball's record might finally be passed. 189 is the highest score for England women in any format. And indeed, Tammy Beaumont made a double hundred and then lost the test. So Snowball gets coached by Larry Constantine as a kid, played lacrosse, played squash for England, was a wicket keeper, once effected 4 stumpings in an innings, which is also still a record, an equal record. Ridiculous player. 572 runs from 7 tests at 64 up until the war started, and then she played on afterwards and wasn't as effective as a player, finished with a test average of 41. But one of the greats, kept playing till 1951 and then umpired the Women's Ashes test that year, which is a cute quirk. In Worcestershire, passed away at the age of 80 in 1988. So she is one of the 99s, the other one being Jill Kinnair, the Australian captain, who did it in a test against India when she was also caught and bowled like Elisa Healy by Shubhangi Kulkarni for 99. So there's something about being the captain and being caught and bowled. So, yeah, we won't go into Jill's story at this time because I think we've done enough for now. But it might be one to come back to another day. Maybe Jane can route, I've been in America too long, can ROUTE a pledge to us via Elise Perry somehow and then get us to JK.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping, that somehow Elise Perry might appear in Jane's next one, but getting us to the story of Jill, which I'd like to tell at some point. Great to have Jane back on the show. Of course, she was part of our live show in Melbourne last year. Who was she playing the role of? I can't remember who we had her playing.
She was playing the British. She was playing Lord Harris.
Oh, she was playing Lord Harris. That's right, wearing the top hat and all the rest of it. Anyway, she was a great force for good in getting us a game at Edinburgh last year, a game that we will play again this year, later in 2024. All right, Jeff, time to take a break. More new numbers and some revisits and some confirmations coming in segment 2 of Storytime 190. It is story time. Adam Collins, Jeff Lemon with you. And Jeff, before we jumped on today, before we started recording our program today, I was watching the World Cup, as I am likely to do, even days I'm not making the daily with you. And I didn't even realize that I was still logged in to my NordVPN. So I continued to, even though I've got a subscription to watch the cricket in the UK, once it was running on the iPad, why was I going to change it over? So I have been using the Nord today. It was crucial to getting me up and about when I was in America. And this is the point. It's for traveling. Don't let your paid subscriptions go to waste. I didn't when I was in America. Access your home content while traveling. Secure your connection on public Wi-Fi, again, like I did in airports, hotels, planes, trains, automobiles, cafes, anywhere you go. I'll be watching. 6,000 servers, 61 countries. And you can find a nearby server for the best VPN speeds.
Natalie Server Brunt.
I wanted to say as well, Jeff, that NordVPN have kindly through our friends at the Sports Social Podcast Network, are going to continue working with us on this show for the next few months, which is pretty cool. That indicates that lots of people have been hearing us talk about nordvpn.com/TFW, taking advantage of the deal, the 30-day money-back guarantee, clicking through from our show notes, nordvpn.com/TFW, and doing what I've been doing and making the most of my paid subscriptions.
Very good. At nordvpn.com/TFW. There we go. You'll find the link. Number, new. It is Ruto. He's back with €1.58, which is the same number he had before, which related to the Olympics in 1900, cricket at the Olympics. But he says the fact that my third pledge is the same as my first is coincidental. This time it has nothing to do with Euros or France. A simple clue, it's a date, and it's my new message tone. I hope this sounds clear enough for you, and sounds has been emphasized. Okay, what have you got?
You know, sometimes, Jeff, when you get a clue and before you've even finished reading it, you know what it is. It doesn't happen too often because you read that above.
Well, yeah, occasionally.
You read that and it could be a number of things. And, it's a date and it's my new message tone. And I immediately knew exactly what it had to be because 158 is my birthday, the 15th of August. And I know something that's very relevant to something that sounds special on the 15th of August. So there you go. So I can tell you about it for Ruto.
Okay.
15th of August.
This is, I mean, sometimes when the clues are a little bit abstract, you grind your teeth a bit. You're like, I don't know. You don't know what end to come at it from. So you must have felt so good when you were like, yeah, got it.
Between the eyes. And moreover, of course, Ruto wouldn't have known that he was talking about the day that I turned 21, the 15th of August, 2005, a significant day in one's life. I remember a little bit about that day. I suppose that's the way my brain works. I remember more detail than most do about stuff that happened in the past.
I bet you remember what day of the week it was.
I do. It was a Monday. I do remember that. And the reason I know it's a Monday is because I know exactly what happened on the 14th of August, 2005, right? Let's go there.
Okay.
Let's go to the MCG. So Hawthorn playing Essendon. The previous time we beaten Essendon was round 11, 1997. I was also there for that. It was a pretty good win. No Dunstall, won by 5 goals. Dunstall was out from round 8 that year, I think, in 97 with a bung knee. But, he found a way. Nick Holland, Ben Dixon, Daniel Chick all kicked 3 goals, and Hawthorn got over the line. Then an awful time against Essendon. 98, one of the first twilight games was at VFL Park. Dunstall kicked 8. Shane Crawford dominated James Hird, but then Blumfield's shot towards the small scoreboard end, right towards the end, was signalled a goal that had hit the post. Daniel Harford climbed the post and pointed to where it hit. There was no DRS for football at the time, so there was no way of turning the decision over. It was Dunstall's last truly great night. Kicked 9, actually, not 8, I think, from memory. But, yeah, it was unjust. We should have won in 98. In 99, an uncompetitive day at VFL Park, I'd rather forget. In 2000, we played well, but never got close enough in their great year. 2001 was the Let's Get Loud night. We were both 8 and zip coming into round 9 at the Docklands Saturday night. And because Hawthorn, during the Grand Prix, had played a pre-season game at the Docklands against Melbourne, which I was also at, and they cracked the shits at how loud the Grand Prix was and playing a game at the Docklands. So Essendon's response, this was our next game there, was to play Jennifer Lopez, Let's Get Loud every time Essendon kicked a goal, and they kicked 8 of them in the first term to our no goals, and they won by about 10 goals, and that was all rather painful. Later in 2001 was the preliminary final loss by 9 points where Darren Goldspick gave Essendon 4 set shot free kick goals in the first term. Trent Crowe shot late, hit the post. Had he kicked it, we would have got into the lead with a minute to go. Not to be. 2002, thankfully, I've forgotten. 2003, I wish I'd forgotten. I took my then girlfriend along to the footy for the first time, and it was absolutely ugly. The same girlfriend who I met, I took to the MCG on that Shane Warne, on her first date with the Shane Warne thing. Anyway, I don't know how on earth she stayed with me for a couple of years, but that's the way it worked. 2004's also vanished, probably for the best. Then in 2005 under Clarko, under Franklin's there with Roughhead and Jordan Lewis, we start to turn around. Round 3 was galling, a wet Sunday afternoon. Remember, we lost by 2 points, and now we're round 20, and it's the day before I'm turning 21. It was our grand final. For all the reasons I've stated, all this pain, our rival not being able to beat them, all that had gone down, and we only went and fucking did it. It was Luke Hodges' first big season, got 36 touches that day, 3 Brownlow votes, Ben Dixon kicked 4. We run out 13-point winners in a high-scoring game, and given it was my 21st birthday the next day, you can probably guess how it played out that night, Jeff, through the streets of Richmond, although we had to look around a little bit being a Sunday, but we made the best of it. The next morning, one of my best mates, Harry, showed up in Melbourne, who has his own energy. I know you know Harry, Jeff, and you've seen the way that he can operate, the level he can operate at.
Yep.
He spent the week at my nan's place where I was living at the time in Dandenong. And I remember Harry and my best mate Ben and a few others went out to dinner on the 15th of August. Then I went to my best mate from school's place, Brad, who didn't like the cricket, but I was at his place, and you better believe I was going to watch day 5 of the Old Trafford Test match. 05 Ashes, I'd been there at Lords a couple of weeks before. And just setting this up a little bit, the Old Trafford Test match, I think, is underrated because we come into it with Australia having won at Lords convincingly, but there was that start that was riveting where England bowled out Australia for under 200 on morning 1. And then England win the thriller at Edgbaston by a couple of runs. And you get to Old Trafford that starts on the 11th of August, and England make 444, you know what I mean? Like Vaughan's 600th wicket, sure, but Michael Vaughan 166 after being dropped early. I've actually seen Vaughanie watching that back during the 19 Ashes when we had a rain delay at Leeds on day 1. They showed that on the screen from Old Trafford 05, and he's sort of sat there in the press box in the back row there watching it. And he's like, I haven't watched this back in full before. And he's watching the highlights and quite enjoying it, as you would, I suppose. It's the beauty of being a former player who's done as well as Vaughan has. Anyway, Brett Lee took 4 wickets, and Shane Warne, of course, took 4 wickets as well. Jeff, quiz question. Who was Australia's third seamer for the Old Trafford Test in 05?
Sean Tate. No. Gillespie come back.
Gillespie came back. Yeah, I'd forgotten this. I'd forgotten that Dizzy got recalled after being dropped at Lords. Casper comes in for Edgbaston, and Gillespie comes back for the third. Then obviously Tate comes into the side for the 4th and 5th, as we all remember. Yep. But yeah, I was surprised. Yeah, I was like, I wonder who was. I kind of thought Kaspovich might have retained his spot, but no. They gave Gillespie one more shot because McGrath misses the 4th, doesn't he? Yeah, but McGrath's out of the second test, and then he's fit again for one more for the 3rd or the 4th. Yeah, I think he comes back for the 4th. Anyway, so Australia, big first innings deficit. They're all at 302. Warney gets 90, so 10 away from the ton that he never quite got there, but he did get them out of the shit. He was one of 6 wickets to a bloke called Simon Jones, who took 6 for 53. We're going to come back to him in a sec. That included 4 in a spell to rout Australia's lower order. He'd been so good at Lords. I remember being there on that first day and getting Damien Martin caught behind first ball of his Ashes campaign with a glorious outswinger. By this point, he was England's Ferrari, right? Like he was there. The luxury of using him at second change, by the way, but he was so good. And the memories of what happened to Simon Jones at Brisbane in 2002, this was a very special day, him taking a 6-wicket bag and blowing Australia away when they were just a chance of getting back to something verging on parity. Then England, the second time around, made proper declaration runs. 280 for 6 declared in just 61 overs. Strauss got 100. Ian Bell got 65, his high score of the series. Right. McGrath got a 5-fer. Warne got none. Dizzy, sadly, none for 23 from 4. Didn't really get much of the ball and was a sign of what was to come. Australia was set 423. Had 108 overs to do it. Back in the era when they thought they could chase anything. And they're none for 24 overnight, which means they need 400 or 399, let's call it 400 to win on the final day. Just what happened in 1948. I remember at the time all the headlines about, they did it at Leeds in 48. Can they do it in Manchester with 10 wickets in hand in 2005? And this was indeed the 15th of August, the 5th and final day. But they went from 24 for none overnight to 25 for 1 very early when Langer nicked off, 96 for 2 when Hayden was bowled by Flintoff, 129 for 3 when Martin was leg before to Harmison, 182 for 4 when Kadich edges Freddie Flintoff as well. And last in the sequence was when Gilchrist got an absolute gem from Flintoff. I remember this, ran the wicket reverse swing. He was bowling those deliveries to Gilchrist so well through the series. 182 for 5, caught in the gully. And then this is the 58th over. There's still 50 to go. Australia are fucked, right? And then Michael Clark walks out. Clark walks out to join Ponting, who'd been watching all of this down the other end. And they put on a really important partnership. Ponting moves beyond 3 figures. It's referred to even now as one of Ponting's finest innings, even though they didn't win the Test match. Spoiler, spoiler. I think most people know how this one ends. But Clark and him are going really nicely. They bat for the better part of 90 minutes together. And then Simon Jones gets brought back into the attack. And Clark on 39, shoulders, arms, and here's the audio. I love that from Nico. That is very good. And that the donk must be the ringtone that Rudo's talking about. Indeed, I'm sure of it because so many people in English cricket have that as their ringtone. The donk. That is very good. Perfect in-swinger. Bad leave, yeah. But was it a bad leave? It swung a mile. Like, Clark should be leaving that. Sometimes you're just defeated by a superb piece of bowling, and that's how I remember that. More than, like, had he been playing at a ball on the fifth stump line and nicked off, it would be seen as a shit shot, right? So I'm not as far in the camp of there are two types of leaves. I think, there's some nuance to it with deliveries like that. Thankfully, they had Warner come in. He was in form and batted for the next 99 minutes. Then there was the late twist. Ponting gloves one down the leg side on 154 to complete his modern-day classic. And that leaves Australia 4 overs to go with Glenn McGrath batting with Brett Lee. By this time, I'm back home, back at me nan's place. And they find a way to get to the finish in that last over with Lee and McGrath facing Harmison. They get the draw to keep it 1-1. Australia celebrate like they've won it, which Michael Vaughan often says when talking about it these days. You see the footage of him pointing up at the Australian balcony saying, this is a sign that we've got them here. An underrated classic of the series. Everybody remembers Edgbaston and the Trent Bridge chase and the Lord's morning one and Peterson on day 5, but Old Trafford was just as good. Went down to the very last ball. Australia also only 50 away from their target. So, there were more than just the two results in play there in the final couple of hours. It was Jones's only wicket of the second innings, but a memorable one, a 7-wicket match. He gets another fifer in the first innings at Trent Bridge, but very sadly, that's basically his career done, which is the sad postscript to all of this, that he only gets to play 18 games for England for 59 wickets and made such a big mark on that 05 Ashes, taking 18 wickets at 21. But his body was never right after that, injuring his ankle at Trent Bridge. Then it was his knee, and then there were a series of other injuries. He actually played first-class cricket until 2013 when he played a couple of seasons with his old club, Glamorgan, but he never got back to England ranks. But he's never forgotten as a bowler, and that's a ball that lives on forever, and it all happened on the day I turned 21, the 15th of the 8th, Rudo 158. There you go.
There you go. And for once, people can't really tell you off for talking about football because you sort of had to lead into the story.
I did.
Because it was relevant.
I did.
It was relevant.
I thought if I didn't talk about the context, it wouldn't have been right.
Okay. It was right. There we go. Good to know what was going on when Daniel Harford was climbing the goalpost, as well as what was happening at Old Trafford. I've got Stephen Baxter with £2.89, just a little clue that says, I wonder whose cap number that might be. Cap 289. Well, there are a few. It could be John Dyson, who once took a catch and apparently never did anything else.
He did plenty. John Dyson.
I mean, according to public memory,
yes.
There are things that people remember about you and things that don't. There's Jacques Rudolph for South Africa. There's Devendra Bishu, who once bowled the ball of the century in 2015, before many more balls of the century were bowled. There's Hardik Pandya for India. Or there's Hopper Reed, not Chopper Reed, but Hopper Reed. And I think initially Steve wanted us to talk about Hopper Reed, but the thing is that this came through after you, Adam, had already done a big, sorry, it came through before, but then you subsequently went on to do a big story on Hopper Reed, which was last September maybe.
Yeah.
So you can go and find the Hopper episode, Stephen probably already has. And look, we talked about Hopper Reed. We talked about him spraying it all over the place. We talked about him being fast as blazes. We talked about him knocking over Jack Hobbs. We talked about the fact that he was shithouse with the bat. He somehow only played one test match, despite being the most exciting bowler in England for a period of time. And you were adamant you would write a book about him, but I'm not sure how much you followed through on that.
No, I have. I've spoken to a publisher about it. So once I'm finished doing what I'm doing at the moment, I think there's a story here. I think there's never been a proper book written about this guy. And look, he isn't the sort of subject that I'd naturally be sympathetic to. He was really posh. And it was ultimately his job that precluded him from playing more test cricket, really. But, anyone who was the fastest bowler in the world and played as well as he did in his very, very brief professional career I feel like there's more to it. There's one long interview on YouTube. Christopher Martin Jenkins went out to his house when he was quite an old man and sat down with him. But in that interview, if I recall correctly, there's all these scrapbooks. I'm like, if I find his family, then maybe I can get hold of all this archive material, and that could be the start of something. But yeah, look, if he goes back, if Stephen hasn't listened to that app, that'll scratch the itch on Hopper. But yeah, I feel like given we've got Stephen in the queue, and we talked about this before the show, he's got another number that he'd lined up for us a few months on. It feels like if we can maybe bring that number forward and you can tell a story about that. How's that sound?
Why not? Why don't we do it? Let's go to his next number, which is £4.58 in that case, which he said relates to a first-class cricketer with 10 initials. I came across his name while reading the book Chinaman, and mainly chose it because I want to hear Jeff read out the full name. All right, well, let's do it. This is the story of ARRAPWRRKB Amunagama. Rajit Amunagama is how his name comes up if you look him up in a database. He played 102 first-class games, took 237 first-class wickets, was a bowler. Strike rate was 45.8, so there's our number, 458. Played between 88 and 2004, so fairly extensive first-class career. The name in full is Amunagama Rajapaksa Rajakaruna Abekun Pandita Vasalamurianse Ralahamalage Rajit Krishanta Bandara Amunagama. Right, fine, easy.
He's, sure.
A little longer than Chaminda Vas, but not by much. Bonakula Surya Patabendiga Joseph Prashanta Chaminda Vas, if you want to be formal. The interesting thing is, so you have these long names, and in a way, it kind of irritates me that people treat it as a thing of fun because it's somebody's name, and I think somebody's name deserves to be respected. It is interesting that when you've got the longest name of any first-class cricketer. So I think there's a balance to be had there. But part of what we've been able to enjoy, you and me, Adam, from travelling around the world over the years that we've done doing this job and travelling to Sri Lanka and India and Pakistan and meeting people and talking to them, is to get to understand some of the cultural context behind these kind of things. And this naming convention stuff is actually fascinating. So a lot of the time with a Sri Lankan name, you'll start with essentially not a family name, but a more broader grouping, a kind of, sometimes they call it the lineage name, which applies to a broader group of people in a certain context, in a certain place. Then you might have a name in there which refers to a village or a place where somebody came from. Then you might have a name that refers to the temple at which that person's family worships, for instance. Because a lot of names there's not like a first name, last name kind of scenario like you have in Western cultures. So, and because a lot of people have relatively similar names, then they throw in these other things to help be specific about which person you're talking about. Which Rajit are you talking about? Because Rajit is sort of his given name. But you might have the temple name, or it might be the name of a holy man that the family follows, or a god that the family follows. If you take the example of E.V.S. Laxman, Vengaparapu Venkata Sai Laxman, and Sai is a reference to the holy man that the family followed. I think that Venkata was his father's name, and Vengaparapu is a reference to the location where he was from. So Lakshman is his name. That's the human being's sort of given name, as it were, but the others are contextual clues. And so fathers' names are often in there. Grandfathers' names are sometimes in there. Sometimes there are names that are professions in there. So it's interesting how all this comes together. So I'd be better off if I had an expert on Sri Lankan phonics on the show who could talk me through this. But the best I could figure was Amunagama is a village. There is a place called Amunagama. So that seems logical. But he's an interesting case because his 10 names start and end with Amunagama. It's there twice, which makes me think that one of them is probably the lineage name, the sort of family grouping name, and one of them is the village name, and they happen to be the same name in this case, and that's why you go one at the start, one at the end, to make that clear. Rajapaksa is quite a common name. We're familiar with the Rajapaksas from the political class, the president and so on, so that's kind of, I guess that's what you might call a clan name, like with Hindi names you have your Sharmas or your Iyers, or in Pakistan you have your Afridis or your Khans, where it's not a surname per se, but it's a broader grouping. It's like you belong to this sort of clan of people from this region, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Raja Karuna and Abekun, the only links I could find with those is that they are mostly treated as surnames, so I'm guessing they're more like specific family links. Pandita can also mean a teacher, so that might be a nod to a profession. The family might have been teachers to begin with. Vasalamurianse and Ralahamelage, I don't know. I couldn't get a bead on what those were specifically. Rajit, I think, is the name that he was given sort of as his daily name. Krishanta, I'm guessing, is like there's a religious sort of connotation there that might be indicating the particular shrine or temple that it might be. And Bandara is an interesting one because that sort of implies an officer in the Sri Lankan royal court in the old days, like, you know, the kind of Bushido era of Sri Lanka, whatever that was, the pre-modern era, when you had a position in the royal court. That was a bandara. So the family, again, might have some sort of link to that. And then you come back to Amanagama. So that's where we end up as we run through Amanagama, Rajapaksa, Rajakaruna, Bekun, Pandita, Vasalamurianse, Ralahamelage, Rajit, Krishanta, Bandara, Amanagama. That's the full context that gives you all of it gives you all of this detail. There's this richness of detail, you know. So you might be Adam, Collins, Dandenong, Daryl, you know, politics, and that could all be thrown in together to give people an idea of which, you know, you might be Adam, Anthony, Amedro, Collins, Dandenong, Daryl, politics, Canberra.
Well, this is it. So I think the Amedro name,
MCG, because that's your place of worship.
Yeah, I think the Amedro name, in terms of my brother and I, now officially is now gone out because I certainly didn't give it to my girls, and my brother had a baby this week, which is pretty cool. His partner Anna, so and they had a girl as well, which is also a lovely thing, Edith. Edith, so another sort of an oldie worldy name,
another old lady name.
Yeah. That's what. So it's a really cool name. I like it, but I don't exactly imagine that Edith's going to cop an Amedro in there as a second middle name like my brother and I did. So that will be the end of that.
Sorry, Daryl. Amedro has left early. So that's our guy, born in 1969. The names thing has made him very popular with writers. Matthew Engel was the wisdom editor when he got a couple of mentions in there, one when he took 8 wickets in a first-class innings. Lawrence Booth in his book about cricket language, Marcus Berkman, the quiz superstar, they all wrote about him. And the noteworthy one from The Clue by Shehan Karunatiakla is the book called Chinaman, given it's about a left-arm wrist spinner. Which our man was not. He was a medium pacer, so sadly we don't have that particular link. But yeah, played youth level for Sri Lanka, played in the Youth World Cup in 1988, and was a seamer at a time when Ranatunga only ever wanted 2 at most, and one of them might bowl 2 overs in the Test match. So he was never in contention really for Test cricket, although he did take that 8 in an innings.
It just occurs to me now that had he been selected, it would have been in all probability alongside Chaminda Vaas. So those two could have played together with the two names that are noteworthy. Chaminda Vaas is probably in the top 5 factoids that, despite having a long and storied career, it's his initials and name, isn't it, that people want to talk about?
Yeah, well, it took 300 Test wickets, so
comfortably
thereabouts. Chaminda Vaas, he was, and probably 400 in ODIs. He was an extraordinary bowler. So yeah, that's our guy. 237 wickets at an average of 27, which is pretty good considering the decks that you've got to bowl on as a seamer in Sri Lankan domestic cricket. And he will probably always have that record for the name. Although I suspect that there are a bunch of other people who could have a name like that if they chose to put all the details down, and that's something that Sri Lankan migrants moving elsewhere have talked about and written about, that you get pressured to lose bits of your name because it's just too difficult in an administrative context, because you have names that won't fit on driver's licenses physically. You have forms that don't give you enough letters to put your name in. You get confusion with your medical records and with your access to, with what you've got on a boarding pass versus a passport. And there are all these ways in which your name, your identity is kind of, you're pressured to drop off parts of it. And so I suspect that's something that we've seen a fair bit of, where people don't cite the full name that could be applicable to them if they wanted it to them.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Stephen Baxter, for being a repeat pleasure, and hopefully you'll have another number in the queue for us soon enough to do so. Patreon.com/the final word, our big push through 2024 to, we've said we want to get to 1,000 patrons. Will we get there? Who's to know? We're going to try. We're going to give it a red hot go.
Ad-free feed. Ad-free feed. Do you want no breaks? No breaks? You can have them. Just join up. You can get it. It's yours. It's within your grasp. The power is yours to have that.
And the benefits are that you get to join our Discord, which is a lovely thing. You can get involved in stuff that we do, be it catches up for the World Cup final, or the Edinburgh Marathon half marathon, or the few games of cricket a year we're now playing in both the UK and Australia, and plenty more. Mm-hmm. It's the nicest corner of the internet. You'll help us do what we do, help fund it, but also help make the Storytime world go around. We've made this 190 times now. Jeff, a quick confirmation, and then we'll go, and then we'll do a few revisits next week amongst our new numbers. That's from Fran Kay, who was one of our half marathon runners a couple of weeks ago, and was out there for the tying runs at Dulwich last year when we needed 2 runs from the final ball. Fran, jumping on late to confirm, obviously, that my nerd pledge from Storytime 185 203 was Paul Nixon. Thanks, Daniel Norcross. And no, it isn't me who edits his Wikipedia page. No, that can't be you, Fran, because it's clearly Paul himself. Daniel spent some more time when we were in America going through this. It is truly an extraordinary thing, Stumper Nixon's Wikipedia page.
The level of detail. So some of our research group have been looking through edits as well, and there are some even more fulsome phrases which have been edited out by other editors who said it wasn't impartial enough, including about 4 paragraphs on one shot that he played when he played a reverse, like a switch hit for 6 off Murali. There was an awful lot of detail in there.
So that's patreon.com/the final word to be part of it. And Jeff, that's us done. You've got a place to be. I've got a sofa to sit on, and we both have more World Cup dailies to make and the weekly show, and on and on it will go. Got a reasonably big interview in the works as well, which I've nearly nailed today. Always working on these things behind the scenes. I'll tell you about it when we get off air. Right, this has been Storytime 190. 10 away from another milestone for us. One we're allowed to celebrate. Jeff didn't let us celebrate 150, but we will celebrate Storytime 200. I'm not sure how we'll do it, but what I do know, it'll involve our Patreon community. So be part of it as well. Thanks for listening, and have a nice weekend.
Bye.